Toddler proved them wrong. "It's okay. I'm here." Those 4 words, whispered by a 3-year-old child, shattered a man who hadn't cried in 7 years. But to understand how a toddler broke through walls that an entire city couldn't crack, you need to know what those walls were built to protect. His name was Daniel Harrington, 52 years old. Net worth, $4.7 billion. And according to every employee who'd ever worked for him, he had the warmth of a January blizzard. They weren't wrong. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. He didn't ask how your weekend was. He arrived at his office at 6 a.m., left at 9 p.m., and in between, he built empires while the people around him barely existed. His mansion sat on 12 acres outside the city, a modern fortress of glass and steel that looked more like a museum than a home. The hallways echoed. The rooms stayed dark, and the staff moved through it like ghosts, careful never to make eye contact. Because eye contact meant conversation, and conversation meant risk. Nobody wanted to risk anything with Daniel Harrington, except for one person. Her name was Sophia, 3 years old, barely tall enough to reach a doorknob, and she had absolutely no idea she was supposed to be afraid. Her mother, Clara Ortega, had been cleaning Daniel's home for 9 months. 34 years old, single mother, worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. The Harrington estate paid well, better than well, but it came with one unspoken rule: stay invisible. Clara followed that rule religiously. She arrived early, cleaned quickly, and left before Daniel returned from the office. She never touched his personal spaces, never moved anything on his desk, never asked questions. But 2 months ago, her babysitter quit without warning, and Clara had no choice but to bring Sophia with her. She won't make a sound. Clara had promised the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Margaret, who ran the estate like a military base. "I swear, you won't even know she's here." Margaret had hesitated, then sighed. "One mistake, Clara. Just one." Clara nodded, her throat tight. She couldn't afford to lose this job. For the first few weeks, Sophia was perfect. She sat quietly in the corner of whatever room her mother cleaned, coloring in a worn notebook, humming softly to herself. She never wandered, never touched anything. But children are curious creatures, and Sophia had noticed something. There was a door at the end of the east wing, tall, heavy, always closed. And behind it, sometimes she could hear something. Not voices, not music, just breathing. Slow, tired, sad. She didn't know how she knew it was sad, but she did. One afternoon, while her mother was vacuuming 2 rooms away, Sophia walked up to that door. She pressed her small hand against the dark wood, fingers splayed wide. And she waited. Inside, Daniel sat at his desk, staring at a contract he hadn't read in 20 minutes. His chest felt tight. His jaw ached from clenching. His hands trembled slightly, something that had been happening more and more lately. He heard the soft thump, a tiny hand, against his door. He didn't move. The hand stayed there for a long moment. Then it slipped away, and he heard the soft patter of small feet retreating down the hall. Daniel exhaled slowly. He told himself it didn't matter. But it happened again the next day. And the day after that. Every time Clara brought Sophia to work, the little girl would eventually make her way to that door. She never knocked, never called out. She just placed her hand there, like she was saying, "I know you're in there." And then she'd leave. Daniel began to expect it. He didn't admit that to himself, but his body knew. Around 2 p.m. each day, his pulse would quicken slightly. His ears would tune in to the sounds beyond his office, waiting. And when that small hand pressed against the door, something in his chest would unclench. Just a little. He hated that feeling, because feeling anything at all was dangerous. Clara noticed her daughter's routine, of course, and it terrified her. "Sophia, mi amor," she whispered one afternoon, kneeling down to meet her daughter's eyes. You can't go to that door. You understand? That's Mr. Harrington's office. Is he sad? Sophia asked. Clara blinked. What? The man in there. Is he sad? Clara's throat tightened. It doesn't matter, baby. We have to leave him alone. But if he's sad. Sophia. Clara's voice was firmer now. No more. Promise me. Sophia looked down at her shoes. Okay, Mama. But children don't always keep promises they don't understand. Daniel's panic attacks had started 3 years after the accident. At first, they were small. A tightness in his chest during board meetings. A sudden need to leave the room. But over time, they grew worse. Now, they came without warning. His vision would tunnel. His heartbeat would slam against his ribs like it was trying to escape. His lungs would forget how to pull in air. He'd learn to hide them. He'd lock his office door, sit on the floor behind his desk, and wait for it to pass. No one could know. Weakness was unacceptable, especially for a man like him. But on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the attack came faster and harder than ever before. He'd been reviewing quarterly reports when his chest suddenly constricted. His fingers went numb. The room tilted. He stood trying to walk it off, but his legs buckled. He hit the floor hard, gasping, his vision swimming. This one wasn't passing. This one felt different. Clara was in the hallway, polishing a mirror, when she heard the crash. Her head snapped up. It had come from his office. She froze, her heart hammering. She wasn't supposed to go in there. Ever. But that sound, she moved toward the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle. Mama? Clara turned. Sophia stood at the end of the hall, her eyes wide. Stay there, baby, Clara said quickly. Don't move. But Sophia didn't listen. She ran, straight past her mother, straight to the door. And before Clara could stop her, Sophia pushed it open. The little girl stepped inside. Daniel was on the floor beside his desk, one hand clutched his chest, his face pale and slick with sweat. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing shallow and jagged. He looked small. Sophia walked toward him slowly. Clara rushed in behind her. Sophia, no. But Sophia was already kneeling beside him. She didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. She climbed onto his chest, gently, carefully, and placed her tiny hands on either side of his face. It's okay, she whispered, her voice soft and steady. I'm here. Daniel's breath hitched. Those words, those exact words. He stared up at the little girl, his vision blurring, not from the panic, but from something else entirely. Because 7 years ago, his daughter had said those same words to him. Her name had been Emma. She'd been 4 years old. It was a Saturday morning. Daniel had been stressed about a merger. Distracted. Irritable. Emma had wanted to go to the park. Not today, sweetheart, he'd said, barely looking up from his laptop. But you promised, Daddy. I said not today. Her face had fallen, but she'd climbed into his lap anyway, wrapping her small arms around his neck. It's okay, she'd whispered. I'm here. He'd hugged her back, briefly, and then set her down. Go play in your room, Emma. Daddy's busy. She'd left. 2 hours later, she'd wandered into the garden, climbed the old oak tree she'd been told not to climb, and fallen. By the time Daniel found her, it was too late. He'd buried her on a Tuesday, and he'd buried himself the same day. He stopped smiling, stopped sleeping, stopped feeling. His wife left him a year later. She couldn't live with a ghost. And Daniel didn't blame her. He'd failed Emma. He'd been too busy, too distracted, too sure there would always be more time. And now there wasn't. So he built walls around his heart, around his life. Because if he never let anyone close again, he could never fail them. He could never lose them. But now, 7 years later, a little girl he didn't even know was lying on his chest, whispering the same words his daughter had whispered. And Daniel Harrington, the man who hadn't cried since the funeral, felt something break inside him. Not his strength, his armor. A sob tore from his throat. Then another. His hands came up slowly, shaking, and rested gently on Sophia's back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Sophia didn't understand, but she didn't need to. She just stayed. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know what to do, didn't know what this meant. But she knew, somehow, that something had just shifted. Something that couldn't be undone. When Daniel finally calmed, Sophia climbed off his chest and sat beside him on the floor. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled drawing, a stick figure holding hands with a smaller stick figure under a smiling sun. "For you," she said simply. Daniel took it with trembling hands. He stared at it for a long time. Then he looked at Clara, who was still standing in the doorway, her eyes red. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for scaring you both." Clara shook her head quickly. "No, Mr. Harrington. I should have stopped her. I didn't mean—" "Don't." His voice was soft. Broken. But not cold. "Please. Don't apologize." He looked down at Sophia, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia." "Sophia," he repeated. He tried to smile. It felt strange on his face. Unfamiliar, but not wrong. "Thank you." She smiled back. And for the first time in 7 years, Daniel felt like he could breathe. After that day, something changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. But it was real. Daniel started leaving his office door open. Not all the way, just a crack. And Sophia, without anyone telling her to, would peek inside every now and then. She'd wave. He'd nod. Sometimes she'd bring him drawings. Sometimes she'd just sit on the floor outside his office, humming to herself while he worked. He didn't send her away. Clara watched it all with a mixture of relief and fear. She didn't understand what had happened that day, not fully, but she could see the change in him. He started saying good morning. He started asking how she was. He started remembering her name. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the panic attack, Daniel found Sophia sitting in the hallway, crying. He stopped. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentler than he'd heard it in years. She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "Mama says we might have to move. Far away." Daniel's chest tightened. "Why?" "Our house is too expensive. And Mama is tired." He crouched down slowly, meeting her eyes. "Where's your mother now?" "Kitchen." Daniel stood. He walked to the kitchen, where Clara was scrubbing counters, her shoulders tight with stress. "Clara." She jumped, spinning around. "Mr. Harrington, I'm sorry. Sophia shouldn't have." "How much do you need?" he asked. She blinked. "What?" "To stay." "How much do you need?" Clara's face flushed. I can't accept. I'm not offering charity." His voice was firm but not harsh. "I'm offering a job. Full-time. Live in if you want. You and Sophia. There's more than enough space here." Clara stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Mr. Harrington, you don't have to decide now," he said quietly. "But the offer stands." She said yes 2 days later. And for the first time in 7 years, the Harrington estate felt like it had life in it. Sophia ran through the hallways. She laughed in the garden. She asked Daniel 1,000 questions, and he answered every single one. Slowly, so slowly, he began to feel like a person again. He started smiling. He started sleeping. He started remembering what it felt like to care. 6 months later, Daniel sat in his office, reviewing a proposal from his legal team. But his mind kept drifting. There was a small drawing taped to the wall beside his desk. A stick figure holding hands with a smaller stick figure. He heard a soft knock. "Come in," he called. Sophia peeked inside, grinning. Mama says dinner's ready. I'll be right there. She didn't leave. She walked over to his desk and climbed into the chair across from him. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Do you have a little girl? Daniel's throat tightened, but he didn't look away. I did, he said softly. A long time ago. Where is she? She's gone. Sophia tilted her head. Like my daddy? Daniel nodded. Yes. Like your daddy. She thought about that for a moment. Then she reached across the desk and took his hand. It's okay, she said. I'm here. Daniel's vision blurred. He squeezed her hand gently. I know, he whispered. Thank you. The city still called him heartless. But they were wrong. He'd never been heartless. He'd just been grieving. And it took a 3-year-old girl, who didn't know she was supposed to be afraid, to remind him that his heart was still there, still beating, still capable of love. If stories like this stay with you, if they remind you that healing doesn't always look the way we expect, then maybe they're worth holding on to. Some transformations don't happen in a single moment. They happen in whispers, in small hands on closed doors, in the courage to let someone in when every part of you wants to stay locked away. Daniel didn't become a different man overnight, but he became a man who tried. And sometimes that's all it takes. A year later, Daniel stood in the garden, watching Sophia chase butterflies. Clara sat beside him on the bench, a cup of tea in her hands. She talks about you like your family, Clara said quietly. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he smiled. She is. And for the first time in 8 years, Daniel Harrington felt like he was home. Because sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never see coming. And sometimes all it takes is a child brave enough to say, it's okay. I'm here. If a story like this touched something in you, if it reminded you that broken doesn't mean beyond repair, then maybe it's worth sharing with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the stories that change us are meant to change